George Orwell, Animal Farm. A parable that may rank as one of the great political satires of our anxious times, said Christopher Morley once. It was illustrated by Joy Batchelor and John Hayles. No, listen. It was this one. It's an old school book. It's Joy Batchelor and John Hayles illustrated it. It's pretty. It's from copyrighted in 1946 by Harcourt Brace World Incorporated. In 1954 by Joy Batchelor and John Hayles. All rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions therefore in any form. But I'm putting it to tape because I am an animal. Animal Farm. Chapter 1. My name is Gregory. I'm a mammal. Chapter 1. Mr. Jones, Manor Farm, was locked in hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the poppets. With the ring of light from his lantern dancing from side to side, he lurched across the yard, kicked off his boots at the back door, drew himself a last glass of beer from the barrel in the scullery, and made his way up to bed where Mrs. Jones was already snoring. As soon as the light in the bedroom went out, there was a stirring and a fluttering all around the farm buildings. Word had gone round during the day that old Major, the prize middle white boar, had a strange dream on the previous night and wished to communicate it to the other animals. It had been agreed that they should all meet on the big barn as soon as Mr. Jones was safely out of the way. Old Major, so he had always been called, as the name under which he had been exhibited was Willingdon Beauty, was so highly regarded on the farm that everybody was quite ready to lose an hour's sleep in order to hear what he had to say. At one end of the big barn, on a sort of raised platform, Major was already ensconced on his bed of straw under a lantern which hung from a beam. He was 12 years old and had lately grown rather stout, but he was still a majestic-looking pig with a wise, benevolent appearance, in spite of the fact that his tushes never had been cut. Before long, the other animals began to arrive and make themselves comfortable after their different fashions. First came the 3 dogs, Bluebell, Jessie, and Pincher. Then came the pigs, who settled down in the straw immediately in front of the platform. The hens perched themselves from the windowsills. The pigeons fluttered up the rafters. The sheep and the cows laid behind the pigs and began to chew the cud. The 2 cart horses, Boxer and Clover, came in together, walking very slowly, setting down their vast hairy hooves with great care lest there should be some small animal concealed in the straw. Clover was a stout, motherly mare, approaching middle life, who had never quite got her figure back after her 4th foal. Boxer was an enormous beast, nearly 18 hands high, as strong as any 2 ordinary horses put together. A white stripe down his nose gave him a somewhat stupid appearance. In fact, he was not of first-rate intelligence. He was universally respected for his steadiness of character and tremendous powers of work. After horses came Muriel, the white goat, Benjamin, the donkey. Benjamin was the oldest animal on the farm, and the worst tempered. He seldom talked, and when he did, it was usually to make some cynical remark. For instance, he would say that God had given him a tail to keep flies off, but that he would sooner have his tail, and no flies, alone among the animals on the farm. He never laughed. If asked why, he would say he saw nothing to laugh at. Nevertheless, without openly admitting it, he was devoted to Boxer. The 2 of them usually spent their Sundays together in the small paddock behind the orchard, grazing side by side and never speaking. The 2 horses had laid down when a brood of ducklings, which had lost their mother, fled into the barn, cheeping feebly and wandering from side to side to find some place where they would not be trodden on. Clover made some sort of wall around with them, the great foreleg, and her ducklings nestled down inside it and promptly fell asleep. At the last moment, Molly, the foolish, pretty white mare who drew Mr. Jones' trap, came mincingly, deigning in, Chewing at the lump of sugar, she took a place near the front and began flitting her white mane, hoping to draw attention to the red ribbons it was plated with. Last of all came the cat, who looked around as usual for the warmest place and finally squeezed herself in between Boxer and Clover. There she purred contentedly throughout Major's speech without listening to a word of what he was saying. All the animals were now present except Moses, the tame raven, who slept on perch behind the back door. When Major saw they had all made themselves comfortable and were waiting attentively, he cleared his throat and began. Comrades, you have heard already the strange dream I had last night, but I will come to the dream later. I have something else to say. I do not, comrades, that I shall be with you many months longer. Before I die, I wish my duty to pass on you such wisdom I have required. I have had a long life. I have not much time, for I thought as I lay alone in my stall, as I think I may say I understand the nature of life on this earth, as well as any animal now living. It is that I wish to speak to you. Now, comrades, the nature of this life of ours, let's face it, our lives are miserable, laborious and short. We are born, we are given just so much food as will keep breath in our bodies, and those who are capable of it are forced to work to the last atom of our strength. At the very instant our usefulness has come to an end, we are slaughtered with hideous cruelty. No animal in England knows the meaning of happiness or leisure after he is a year old. No animal in England is free. The life of an animal is misery and slavery. That is the plain truth. But the simple part of the order of nature, it is because this land of ours is so poor it cannot afford a decent life to those who dwell upon it. No, comrades, 1,000 times no. The soil of England is fertile. The climate is good. It is capable of affording food in abundance to an enormously greater number of animals than now inhabit it. The single farm of ours would support 12 horses, 20 cows, in comfort and dignity that are now almost beyond our imagining. Why then do we continue in this miserable condition? Because nearly the whole produce of our labor is stolen by human beings? There, comrades, is the answer to all of our problems. It is summed up in a single word: man. Man is the only real enemy we have. Remove man from the scene and the root cause of hunger, overwork, will be abolished forever. Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He is too weak to pull the plow. He cannot run fast to catch rabbits. Yet he is lord of all of the animals. He sets them to work. He gives them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving. The rest he keeps for himself. Our labor tills the soil. Our dung fertilizes it. There is not one of us that owns more than its bare skin. You cows, I see before me, how many thousands of gallons of milk have you given during this last year? And what has happened to the milk that should be breeding up to sturdy calves? Every drop has gone down the throat of our enemies. And you hens, how many eggs have you laid last year? And how many of those eggs have hatched into chickens? The rest have all gone to market to buy in money for Jones and his men. And you, Clover, where are those 4 fowls you bore? Who should be support and pleasure of your old age? Each was sold a year old, which you should never see one of them again. In return are your 4 confinements and all of your labor in the fields, what you have ever had except for bare rations in a stall. And even the miserable lives we lead are not allowed to reach their natural span. For myself, I do not grumble, for I am one of the lucky ones. I am 12 years old, and over 400 children. Such is the natural life of a pig. But no animal escapes the cruel knife in the end. You young porkers who are sitting in front of me, every one of you will scream your lives out at the block within a year. To that horror we must all come, cows, pigs, hens, sheep, everyone. Even you, the horses, the dogs of no better fate. You, Boxer, the very day that those great muscles of useless power Jones will sell you to the knacker, who will cut your throat and boil you down for the foxhounds. As for the dogs, when they grow old and toothless, Jones ties a brick at their necks and drowns them in the nearest pond. Is it not crystal clear, then, comrades, that all the evils of this life spring from the tyranny of human beings? Only rid of man and our produce of labor will be our own. Almost overnight we become rich and free. What then must we do? Why work night and day, body and soul, for the overthrow of the human race? That is my message to you, comrades. Rebellion. I do not know when that rebellion will come. It might be in a week, or in 100 years. But as I know, as surely as I know it's this straw beneath my feet, that sooner or later justice will be done. Fix your eyes on that, comrades, throughout the short remainder of your lives. Above all, pass on this message of mine to all those that come after you, so that future generations shall carry on the struggle and be victorious. And remember, comrades, your resolution must never falter. No argument must lead you astray. Never listen when they tell you that man and animals have a common interest. The prosperity is one, it's the prosperity of the others. It is all lies. Man serves the interests of no creature except himself. Among any animals, there is perfect unity, perfect camaraderie in the struggle. All men are enemies. All animals are comrades. At this moment, there was a tremendous uproar. While Major was speaking, 4 rats had crept out of their holes and were sitting on their hindquarters listening to him. The dog had suddenly caught sight of them, and was only by a swift dash for their holes the rats saved their lives. Major raised his trotter for silence. Comrades, he said, here is the point that must be settled. The wild creatures, such as rats and rabbits, are they our friends or enemies? Let us put it to a vote. I propose this question to the meeting. Are rats comrades? The vote was taken at once. It was agreed by an overwhelming majority that rats were comrades, that there were only 4 dissentients, and the 3 dogs and the cats, who were afterwards discovered to have voted on both sides. Major continued. I have little more to say. I merely repeat. Remember always your duty of enmity towards man and all of his ways. Whatever goes upon 2 legs, its enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs, has wings, is a friend. And remember also, in fighting against man, we must not come to resemble him. Even when you have conquered him, do not adopt his vices. No animal must ever live in a house, or sleep in a bed, or wear clothes, or drink alcohol, or smoke tobacco, or touch money, or engage in trade. All the habits of man are evil. And above all, no animal must ever tyrannize his own kind. Weak or strong, clever or simple, we are all brothers. No animal must ever kill any other animal. All animals are equal. And now, comrades, I will tell you about my dream last night. I cannot describe that dream to you. It was a dream of the earth, as it will be when man has vanished. But it reminded me of something I'd long forgotten many years ago when I was a little pig. My mother, the other sows, used to sing an old song they knew only from the tune, the first 3 words. I'd known the tune in my infancy. It had long since passed out of my mind. Last night, however, it came back in my dream. And what is more, the words of the song also came back. Words, I am certain, which were sung to animals long ago and had been lost to memory for generations. I will sing you that song now, comrades. I am old, and my voice is hoarse. But when I have taught you the tune, you can sing it for yourselves. It is called Beasts of England. Old Major cleared his throat and began to sing. As he said, his voice was hoarse, but he sang well enough. It was a stirring tune, something like between Clementine and La Cucaracha. The words ran, Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime, Huck off of joyful tidings of a golden future time. Sooner or later, day is coming, time man shall overthrown. Fruitful fields of England shall be trod by beasts alone. Wind shall vanish from our noses and on its our back. Bat and spur shall watch forever, crowets no more shall crack. which is more than man can picture. Wheat and barley, oats and hay, clover, beans and mango woods, all shall be ours upon that day. Bright will shine the fields of England, pure shall waters be. Sweeter yet shall blow its breezes on the day that sets us free. Day. For that day we all must labor, although we die before it break. Cows and horses, geese and turkeys, all must toil for freedom's sake. Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land, every clime, fucking well and spread my tidings of a golden future time. The singing of this song threw the animals into the wildest excitement. Almost before Major had reached the end, they began singing it for themselves. Even the stupidest of them had already picked up the tune, a few of the words. As for the clever ones, such as the pigs and the dogs, they had the entire song by heart within a few minutes. Then, after a few preliminary tries, the whole farm burst out into the beasts of England in tremendous unison. The cows lowed it, the dogs whined it, the sheep bleated it, the horses whinnied it, the ducks quacked it. They were so delighted with the song, they sang it right through 5 times in succession, and might have continued singing it all night if had they not been interrupted. Unfortunately, the uproar woke Mrs. Jones. Mr. Jones, who sprang out of bed making sure there was a fox in the yard, he seized a gun, which always stood in the corner of his bedroom, and let fly a charge of number 6 shot into the darkness. The pellets buried themselves into the wall of the barn, and the meeting broke up hurriedly. Everyone fled to his own sleeping place. The birds jumped on their perches. The animals settled down in the straw. The whole farm was asleep in a moment. 3 nights later, Major died peacefully in his sleep, his body buried at the foot of the orchard. This was early in March. During the next 3 months, there was much secret activity. Major's speech had given the more intelligent animals on the farm completely new outlook on life. They did not know whether the rebellion predicted by Major would take place, but they had no reason for thinking it would not be within their own lifetime, for they saw clearly it was their duty to prepare for it. The work of teaching the organization to others fell naturally upon the pigs, who were generally recognized as being the cleverest of the animals. Preeminent among the pigs were the 2 young boars named Snowball and Napoleon, whom Mr. Jones breeded for sale. Napoleon was large, rather fierce-looking Berkshire boar, the only Berkshire on the farm. Not much of a talker, but with a reputation for getting his own way. Snowball was more vivacious pig than Napoleon, quicker in speech and more inventive, not considered to have the same depth of character. All the other male pigs on the farm were porkers. The best known among them was a small fat pig named Squealer, with very round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movements, and a shrill voice. His brilliant talker even when arguing some difficult point. He always had a way of skipping from side and whisking his tail, which was somehow very persuasive. The others said that Squealer could turn black into white. These 3 had elaborated the Major's teachings into a complete system of thought, to which they gave the name animalism. Several nights a week, after Mr. Jones was asleep, they held secret meetings in the barn, expounded the principles of animalism to the others. At the beginning, they met with much stupidity and apathy. Some of the animals talked of the duty of loyalty to Mr. Jones, whom they referred to as Master, or made elementary remarks as Mr. Jones feeds us. If he were gone, we should starve to death. Others asked us questions as, why should we care if it happens after we're dead? If this rebellion is to happen anyway, what difference does it make whether we work for it or not? And the pigs had great difficulty in making them see that this was contrary to the spirit of animalism. The stupidest questions of all were asked by Molly, the white mare. The first question she asked Snowball was, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? No, Snowball said firmly. We have no means of making sugar on this farm. Besides, you do not need sugar. You will have all the oats and hay you want. And shall I be allowed to wear ribbons in me mane? Asked Molly. Comrade, said Snowball, Those ribbons you're so devoted to are badges of slavery. Can you not understand that liberty is worth more than ribbons? Molly agreed. She did not sound very convinced. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract the lies put out by Moses, the tame raven. Moses, who was Mr. Jones' special pet, a spy, tall talebearer, was a clever talker. He claimed to know of the existence of a mysterious country called Sugar Candy Mountain, to which all animals went when they died. It was situated somewhere up in the sky, up a little distant beyond the clouds, Moses said. In Sugar Candy Mountain, it was Sunday 7 days a week. Clover was in season all year round, and lump sugar and linseed cake grew on hedges. The animals hated Moses because he told tales and did no work. But some of them believed in Sugar Candy Mountain, and the pigs had to argue very hard to sway them that there was no such place. Their most faithful disciples were the two cart horses, Boxer and Clover. These two had great difficulty in thinking of anything out for themselves. But having once accepted the pigs as their teachers, they absorbed everything they were told and passed it on to the other animals by simple arguments. They were unfailing in their attendance at the secret meetings in the barn and led the singing of the beasts of England, in which the meetings always ended. Now, as it turned out, the rebellion was achieved much earlier and more easily than anyone had expected. In past years, Mr. Jones, though a hard master, had been a capable farmer, but of late he had fallen on evil days. He had become much disheartened after losing money in a lawsuit, and taken to drinking more than was good for him. The whole days of the time he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen, reading newspapers, drinking, occasionally feeding Moses on crusts of bread soaked in beer. His men were idle and dishonest, the fields were full of weeds, buildings wanted roofing, the hedges were neglected, animals were underfed. June came and hay was ready for cutting. On Midsummer's Eve, which was Saturday, Mr. Jones went to Wellington to get so drunk at the Red Lion, they had not come back till midday Sunday. The men milked the cows early morning and gone out rabbiting without bothering to feed the animals. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to the sofa in the drawing room, where the news of the world over his face, so that when evening came, the animals were still unfed. At last, they could stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with her horn, and all the animals began to help themselves up from the bins. It was just then that Mr. Jones woke up. The next moment, he and his 4 men were in the store shed, with whips in their hands, lashing out in all directions. This was more than the hungry animals could bear. With one accord, though nothing of the kind had been planned before, they flung themselves upon their tormentors. Jones's men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of their control. They had never seen animals behave like this before, and this sudden uprising of creatures they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they chose, frightened them almost out of their wits. After a moment or two, they gave up trying to defend themselves and took to their heels. A minute later, all 5 of them in full flight down the cart track led to the main road, with the animals pursuing in triumph. Mr. Jones looked out of the bedroom window, saw what was happening hurriedly. A few possessions in a carpet bag slipped out of the farm another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones and his men out on the road and slammed the 5-barreled gate behind them. And so, before they knew what was happening, the rebellion had been successfully carried through. Jones was expelled, and the manor farm was theirs. For the first few minutes, the animals could hardly believe their good fortune. The first act was to gallop in a body right around the boundaries of the farm, as though to make quite sure that no human being was hiding anywhere in it. Then they raced back to the farm buildings to wipe out the last traces of Jones' hated reign. The harness rooms at the end of the stables was broken open. The bits, the nose rings, the dog chains, the cruel knives with which Jones had been used to castrate the pigs and the lambs were all flung down the well. The reins, the halters, the blinkers, the grating nose bags were thrown in the rubbish fire, which was burning in the yard. So were the whips. All the animals capered with joy when they saw the whips going up in flames. Snowball also threw on the fire the ribbons with which the horses' manes and tails had usually been decorated on market days. Ribbons should be considered as clothes and our marks as human beings. All of the animals should go naked. When Boxer heard this, he fetched a small straw hat he wore in summer to keep the flies off his ears and flung it in the fire with the rest. In a very little while, the animals had destroyed everything that reminded him of Mr. Jones. Napoleon then led them back to the store shed and served them a double ration of corn to everybody, with 2 biscuits for each dog. Then they sang Beasts of England from end to end 7 times running. And after that, they settled down before the night and slept as they never slept before. But they awoke at dawn as usual and suddenly remembered the glorious thing had happened. They all raced to the pasture together. A little way down the pasture there was a knoll that commanded a view of most of the farm. The animals rushed up to the top of it and gazed around them in the clear morning light. Yes, it was theirs. Everything they could see was theirs. An ecstasy of thought. They had gamboled round and hurled themselves in the air in great leaps of excitement. They rolled in the dew. They cropped mouthfuls of sweet summer grass. They kicked up clods of black earth and snuffed its rich scent. Then they made a toward inspection of the whole farm and surveyed with speechless admiration the plowland, the hayfield, the orchard, the pool, the spinney. And as though they had never seen these things before, even now they could hardly believe that it was all their own. Then they filed back to the farm buildings and halted in silence outside the door of the farmhouse. That was theirs too, but they were frightened to go inside. After a moment, however, Snowball and Napoleon butted the door open with their shoulders, and the animals entered in single file, walking in the most utmost care for fear of disturbing anything. They tiptoed from the room to room, afraid to speak above a whisper, and gazing with a kind of awe and unbelievable luxury at the beds, at the feather mattresses and the looking glass and the horsehair sofa and Brussels carpet and lithograph of Queen Victoria over the drawing room mantelpiece. They were just coming down the stairs when Molly discovered to be missing. Going back, the others found that she had remained behind Beth's bedroom. She had taken a piece of blue ribbon from Mrs. Jones' dressing table and was holding it against her shoulder, admiring herself in the glass in a very foolish manner. The others reproached her sharply, and they went outside. Some hams hanging in the kitchen were taken out for burial. A barrel of beer in the scullery of the stove was taken out with a kick from Boxer's hoof. Otherwise, nothing in the house was touched. The unanimous resolution was passed on the spot that the farmhouse should be preserved as a museum. All were agreed that no animal must ever live there. The animals had their breakfast, and Snowball and Napoleon called them together again. Comrades, Snowball, it is 6:30, and we have a long day before us. Today we begin the hay harvest. And there is another matter that must be attended first. The pigs now revealed that during the past 3 months they had taught themselves to read and write from an old spelling book which had belonged to Mr. Jones' children, which had been thrown on a rubbish heap. Napoleon sent for pots of black and white paint, and led way back down the 5-barred gate, and gave on the main road. Then Snowball, for it was Snowball who was best in writing, took a brush between the 2 knuckles of his trotter and painted out Manor Farm on the top bar, and in its place painted Animal Farm. This was to be the name of the farm from now onwards. After this, they went back to the farm buildings, where Snowball and Napoleon sent for a ladder, which they caused to be set against the end wall of the big barn. Explained by their studies that the past 3 months, the pigs had succeeded in reducing the principles of animalism to 7 commandments. These 7 commandments would now be inscribed on a wall. They would form an unalterable law by which all animals on Animal Farm must live forever after. With some difficulty, for it was not easy for a pig to balance himself on a ladder. Snowball climbed up and set to work, with Squealer a few rungs below him, holding a paint pot. The commandments were written on a tarred wall in great white letters that could read 30 yards away. They ran thus: the 7 commandments. 1. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. 2. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. 3. No animal shall wear clothes. 4. No animal shall sleep in a bed. 5. No animal shall drink alcohol. 6. No animal shall kill any other animal. 7. All animals are equal. It was neatly written, except that friend was written friend with F-R-E-I-N. Friend, when one of the S's was spelled the wrong way around. The spelling was correct all the way through. Snowball read it aloud for the benefit of the others. All the animals nodded in complete agreement. The clever ones began at once to learn the commandments by heart. Now, comrades, cried Snowball, throwing down the paintbrush, to the hayfield. Let us make it a point of honor to go in to harvest more quickly than Jones and his men could do. But at this moment, the 3 cows, who had seemed uneasy for times past, set up loud lowing. They had not been milked for 24 hours. Their udders were almost bursting. After a little thought, the pig sent for buckets and milked the cows fairly successfully, their trotters being well adapted to his task. Soon there were 5 buckets of frothing, creamy milk, which the animals looked at with considerable interest. What's going to happen to all that milk? Said someone. Jones used to mix it with some of our mash, says one of the hens. Never mind the milk, comrades, cried Napoleon, placing himself in front of the buckets. That will be attended to. The harvest is more important. Comrade Snowball will lead the way. I shall follow in a few minutes. Forward, comrades. The hay is waiting. So the animals trooped down the hayfield to begin the harvest. When they began back in the evening, they noticed the milk had disappeared. 3. How they toiled and sweated to get the hay in, but their efforts were rewarded. The harvest had been an even bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. Implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals. It was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pigs so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field and in fact understood the business of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men had done. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clover would be harnessing themselves at a cutter or a horse rake. No bits or reins were needed in these days, of course. They tramped steadily round and round the field with the pig walking behind, calling out, "Gee up, comrade," or "Whoa back, comrade," whatever the case may be. And every animal down the humble worked in turning the hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all day in the sun, carrying tiny wisps of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days less time, and it had been usually taken Jonah and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever. The hens and ducks, who had their sharp eyes, had gathered up the very last stalk. Not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through the summer, the work on the farm went like clockwork. The animals were happy as they never could see possibly to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute, positive pleasure, and is now truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out, not grudging master, not the worthless, parasitical human beings gone, not the more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure, too, though inexperienced animals were. They met with difficulties. For instance, later in the year, when the harvest of the corn, they had to tread it out in the ancient style and blow away the chaff with their breath, since the farm possessed no threshing machine. But the pigs, with their cleverness, and Boxer, with his tremendous muscles, always pulled them through. Boxer was an admiration of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in Jones' time, but now he seemed to be more like 3 horses in one. There were days when the entire work on the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night, he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the work was the hardest. He made an arrangement with one of the cockerels to call him in the mornings half an hour earlier than anyone else, and he would put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be most needed before the regular day's work began. His answer to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as his personal motto. But everyone worked according to his capacity. The hens and ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole, nobody grumbled over his rations, and quarreling, and biting, and jealousy, which had been normal features of life in the early days, had almost disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the mornings, and had a way of leaving work early on the ground that there was a stone in her hoof. And the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that when there was work to be done, the cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times, in the evenings after the work was over, as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so affectionately. It was impossible not to believe her good intentions. Old Benjamin, the donkey, seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way that he had done it in Jones' time, never shirking, never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. When asked whether he was happier now that Jones was gone, he would say only, "Donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey." And others would be content with this cryptic answer. On Sundays there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual. After breakfast there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came hoisting the flag. Snowball had found it in the harness room of an old green tablecloth of Mr. Jones's and had painted on its hoof and horn in white. This was run up a flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoof and horn signified the future republic of animals which would arise when the human race had finally been overthrown. After the hoisting of the flags, all animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly which was known as the meeting. Here the work of the coming week was planned out and resolutions were being put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far more active in debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted to oppose it. Even when it was resolved a thing no one could object to in itself, then set aside the small paddock behind the orchard as the rest of the animals who were past work, there was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meeting always ended with the singing of the beasts of England. The afternoon was given up to recreation. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here in the evenings they studied blacksmithing, carpentering, other necessary arts from books which they had brought out from the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing other animals in what he called animal committees. He was indefatigable at this. He forced egg production committee for the hens, clean tail league for the cows, the Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee. The objection was to tame the rats and rabbits, the whiter wool movement for the sheep, and various others, besides instituting classes in reading and writing. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempt to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to behave very much as before, and when treated with generosity, simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the Re-Education Committee and was very active in it for some days. She had been seen sitting one day on the roof and talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all the animals were now comrades, and that any sparrows who chose could come and perch on her paw. But the sparrows kept their distance. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. Almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the 7 Commandments. Muriel, the goat, could read somewhat better than dogs. Sometimes used to read others in the evening from scraps of newspaper which she found in the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. As far as he knew, there was nothing worth reading. Clover learned the whole alphabet, but could not put the words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace an A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, then would stand there staring at the letters with his ears back. sometimes shaking a forelock, trying with all of his might to remember what came next, and never succeeding. On several occasions, indeed, he did learn E, F, G, and H, but by the time he knew them, he always discovered he had forgotten A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first 4 letters, and used to write them out once or twice a day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any but the 6 letters which spelled her own name. She would form these very neatly out in pieces of a twig, and would then decorate them with a flower or two, and walk around admiring them. None of the other animals on the farm could get further in the letter A. It was also found that the stupider animals, such as sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to learn the 7 commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that 7 commandments could in fact be reduced to a single maximum, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principle of animalism. Whoever it thoroughly grasped would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seemed they also had 2 legs, but Snowball proved to them that this was not so. A bird's wings, comrades, he said, is an organ of propulsion, not manipulation. It therefore should be regarded as a leg. This distinguishing mark of man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all of his mischief. The birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn new maxim by heart. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was inscribed on the end wall of the barn, above the 7 commandments in bigger letters. When they had once got it by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often they lay in the field, and they would start bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and keep it up for hours on end, never growing tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committees. He said that the education of the young was more important than anything that could be done for all those who had already grown up. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell both whelped soon as they had the hay harvest, giving birth between them 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up to a loft, which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, where they kept them in such seclusion from the rest of the farm they soon forgot their existence. The mystery where the milk went was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was littered with the windfalls. The animals had assumed that the matter of course these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all of the windfalls to be collected and brought to the harness room for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was no use. All the pigs were in full agreement on this point, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make necessary explanations to the others. "Comrades," he cried, "you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science, comrades, contains substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management of the organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink the milk and eat these apples. Do you know what would happen if we pig failed in our duties? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely, comrades," cried Squealer almost pleadingly, skipping from side to side, whisking his tail. "Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back." Now there was one thing the animals were completely certain of, and they did not want Jones back. And to put them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed without further argument that the milk and the windfall of apples, and also the main crop of apples when they ripened, should be reserved for pigs alone. 4. By the late summer, the news of what happened on animal farms spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons. Instructions were to mingle with the animals in neighboring farms, tell them stories of the rebellion, teach them the tunes of the beasts of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones was sitting in the tap room of the Red Lion in Wellington, complaining to anyone that would listen the monstrous injustice he was suffering in being turned out of the property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The farmer sympathized in principle, but did not first give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering how he could not somehow turn Jones' misfortune to his advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the other two farms had joined animal farms that permanently had terms. One of them, which was named Foxwood, had a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by woodland, and all of its pastures worn out. Its hedges were in disgraceful condition. Its owners, Mr. Plinkton, was an easygoing gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in fishing or hunting according to season. The other farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept. Its owner was Mr. Frederick, a rough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits with a name for driving hard bargains. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult to keep them to any agreement, even in defense of their own interests. Nevertheless, they were both frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first, they pretended to laugh to scorn at the ideas of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. And they put it about the animals on Manor Farm. They insisted on calling it Manor Farm. They would not tolerate the name Animal Farm, were perpetually fighting among themselves, and were also rapidly starving to death. When time passed, the animals had evidently not starved to death. Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk the terrible wickedness now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out in animals that practiced cannibalism, tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes, had their females in common. This, what came in rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never fully relieved. However, those stories were never fully believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs continued to circulate in vague, distorted forms. Throughout the year, a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges, devouring the clover. Cows kicked the pail over. Hunters fused their fences and shot their riders on the other side. Above all, the tune, even the words of Beast of English, were known everywhere. It was spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard this song. Though they pretended to think it merely ridiculous, they could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such contemptible rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot, and yet the song was irresistible. The blackbirds whistled in the hedges, the pigeons cooted in the elms. It got into the din with the smithies and the tune of the church bells. And when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing in it a prophecy of their future doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked, some of it was already threshed. A flight of the pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted in part of the animal farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all of his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-barred gate and were coming up the cart track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks, except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt to recapture the farm. This had long been expected. All preparations had been made. Snowball had studied an old book, Julius Caesar's campaigns, which he found in the farmhouse. Was in charge of defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly. Within a couple minutes, every animal was at its post. As the human beings approached the farm buildings, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, the number of 35, flew to and fro over the men's head and muted upon them from midair. While the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind a hedge, rushed out and pecked viciously at the calves with their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing maneuver, intended to create a little disorder. The men evilly drove off the geese with the sticks. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned round and lashed at them with his small hoofs. But once again the men, with their sticks, their hobnailed boots, were too strong for them. Suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, which was a signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled from the gateway into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemies in flight. They rushed after them in disorder. This was what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well within the yard, the 3 horses, 3 cows, and the rest of the pigs, which had been lying in ambush in the cowshed, suddenly emerged in their rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight at Jones. Jones saw him coming and raised his gun and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and the sheep dropped dead. Without halting an instant, Snowball flung his 15-snode against Jones' legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung. His guns flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron-shod hoofs like a stallion. His very first blow took the stable lad from Foxwood on the skull and stretched lifeless in the mud. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them. The next moment, all the animals together were chasing round and round in the yard. They were gored, kicked, bit, and trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take the vengeance on them in his own fashion. Even the cat suddenly leaped off the roof on a cowman's shoulders and sank her claws in his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At that moment, when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush off the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so, within 5 minutes of their invasion, their ignominious retreat, the same way they had come, with a flock of geese hissing after them, pecking at their calves all the way. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hooves at the stable lad, who was laying face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not stir. "He is dead," Boxer said sorrowfully. "I did not intend on doing that. I forgot I was wearing iron shoes. Who will believe I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, whose wounds and blood were still dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "I have no wish to take a life, not even a human life," repeated Boxer. His eyes were full of tears. "Where is Molly?" exclaimed somebody. Molly was in fact missing. For a moment there was great alarm. It was feared the men might have harmed her in some way, even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall, with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun went off, and the others came back looking for her. It was to find a stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made off. The animals had now assembled the wildest excitement, each recounting his exploits in battle at the top of his voice. An impromptu celebration of victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and Peace of England was sung a number of times. Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. At the graveside, Snowball made a little speech emphasizing the need for all animals to be ready to die for an animal farm if need be. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred then and there on Snowball and Boxer. It was considered a brass medal. There were really some old horse brasses which had been found in the harness room to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of the Cowshed, since it had been where the ambush had sprung. Mr. Jones' gun had been found lying in the mud. It was known there had been a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery, and to fire twice a year, once October and the 12th, and the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, once on Midsummer Day and the anniversary of the rebellion. 5. As winter drew on, Molly became more and more troublesome. She was late for work every morning, excused herself saying she had overslept. She complained of mysterious pains, although her appetite was excellent. And every kind of pretext to run away from work and go to the drinking pool, where she would stand foolishly gazing at her own reflection in the water. But there were also rumors of something more serious. One day, as Molly strolled blithely into the yard, flirting her long tail and chewing a stalk of hay, Clover took her aside. "Molly," she said, "I have something very serious to say to you. This morning I saw you looking over the hedge that divides Animal Farm from Foxwood. One of Plinkington's men was staying on the other side of the hedge. I was a long way away. I was almost certain I saw this. He was talking to you, and you were letting him stroke your nose. What does this mean, Molly? He didn't. I wasn't. It isn't true, cried Molly, beginning to prance around and paw the ground. Molly, look me in the face. Did you give me your word of honor that this man was not stroking your nose? It isn't true, repeated Molly. But she could not look Clover in the face. The next moment, she took her heels and galloped away into the field. A thought struck Clover. Without saying anything to the others, she went to Molly's stall and turned over the straw with her hoof. Hidden under the straw was a little pile of a lump of sugar and several bunches of ribbons of different colors. 3 days later, Molly disappeared. For some weeks, there was nothing known about her whereabouts. Then the pigeons reported that they had seen her on the other side of Willington. She was between the shafts of a smart dog cart, painted red and black, and was standing outside a public house. A fat, red-faced man in check breeches and gaiters, who looked like a publican, was stroking her nose and feeding her sugar. Her coat was newly clipped, and she wore a scarlet ribbon around her forelock. She appeared to be enjoying herself, so the pigeons said, when the animals ever mentioned Molly again. In January, they came bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron. Nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings held themselves in the big barn. The pigs occupied themselves with planning out of work in the coming season. It had come to be accepted by the pigs as manifestly clever than the other animals should decide all the questions of farm policy, though their decisions had to be ratified by a majority vote. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputers between Napoleon and Snowball. These two disagreeable at every point of disagreement possible. If one of them suggested sowing a big acreage with barley, the other was certain to demand bigger acreage of oats. If one said to them such a field was just right for cabbage, the other would declare it was useless for anything except roots. Each had his own following, and there was some violent debates. I mean, Snowball often won over the majority with his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He successfully did with sheep. Of late, sheep had taken to bleating. 4 legs was good, 2 legs bad, both in and out of season. and they often interrupted the meeting with this. It was noticed they were especially liable to break up into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Snowball made a close study of some of the back numbers of the farmer and stock breeder in which he had found in the farmhouse, and was full of plans for innovations and improvements. He talked learnedly about field drains, silage, basic slag, and worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to drop their dung directly into the fields at a different spot every day to save the labor of cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that Snowball's would come to nothing, and seemed to be biding his time. But of their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill. In the long pasture, not far from the farm building, was a small knoll over the highest point of the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was just the place for a windmill, which could be made to operate a dynamo, supply the farm with electricity and power. This would light stalls and warm them in winter, which would also run a circular saw, a chaff cutter, a mangold slicer, an electric milking machine. The animals had never heard of anything of this kind before, for the farm was an old-fashioned one, with only the most primitive machinery. They listened in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of working the most fantastic machines which would do their work for them while they grazed at their ease in their fields and improved their minds while reading and conversation. With a few weeks of Snowball's plans for the windmill fully worked out, the mechanical details came mostly from 3 books which had belonged to Mr. Jones. 1,000 Useful Things to Do About the House, Every Man His Own Bricklayer, Electricity for Beginners. Snowball used to study a shed which once had been used for incubators and smooth wooden floor suitable for drawing on. He was closeted out there for hours at a time, with his books held open by a stone, with a piece of chalk gripped in between the knuckles of his trotter. He would move rapidly to and fro, drawing line after line, uttering little whimpers of excitement. Gradually, the plans came into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels, covering more than half the floor, which other animals found completely unintelligible, but very impressive. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came, with pains not to tread on chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily round the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, snuffed them once, twice, then stood a little while, contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted a leg, urinated over the plans, and walked out without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill. Snowball did not deny that building would be a more difficult business. Stone would have to be carried to build up the walls, then the sails would have to be made, and after that would be needed dynamos and cables. However, these were to be procured, Snowball did not say. But he maintained that all could be done in a year. Thereafter declared so much labor would be saved by all the animals would only need to work out 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that great need of the moment was needed to increase food production, and they wasted time on the windmill, and they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into two factions, and their slogans: vote for Snowball in the 3-day week, vote for Napoleon in full manger. Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either that food would become more plentiful or the windmill would save work. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it always go on, that is badly. Apart from disputes over the windmill, there was a question over defense of the farm. It was fully realized that, though the human beings had been defeated in the Battle of the Cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reason for doing so because news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreement. According to Napoleon, the animals must do was procure firearms and train themselves to use them. According to Snowball, they must send out more pigeons and stir up rebellion among the animals on the other farms. The one argued they could not defend themselves, they were bound to be conquered. The other, the rebellions happened everywhere, there would be no need to defend themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their minds, which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with the one who was speaking at the moment. At last, the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting on the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin working on the windmill was put to vote. When the animals had assembled in the big barn, Snowball stood up, and though occasionally interrupted by the bleating of the sheep, set forth his reasons for advocating and building the windmill. Then Napoleon stood up in reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was nonsense. He advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet, shouting down the sheep. Had begun to bleed again, broke into passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences, he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when assorted labor is lifted from the animals' backs. His imagination would now run far beyond chaff cutters and turnip slicers. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers, reapers, binders, besides supplying every stall with its own electric light, hot, cold water, electric heating. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt which way the vote would go. By this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside. 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding in the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door and they were after him, too amazed and frightened to speak. All the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running only as a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly, he slipped and seemed certain they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. The dogs were gaining on him again. One of them had all but closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, and Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on an extra spurt, and a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the edge, and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where the creatures came from, but the problems were soon involved. They were puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet fully grown, they were huge dogs and fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed they wagged their tails to him in the same way that the other dogs used to do to Mr. Jones. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted on the raised portion of the floor where Major previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on, Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. That was unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In the future, all questions relating to working the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. These would meet in private, afterwards communicate their decisions to others. All animals would still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag, sing Beasts of England, and receive their orders for the week, but there would be no more debates. In spite of the shock that Snowball's expulsion had given them, the animals were dismayed by this announcement. Several of them would have protested if they could have found the right arguments. Even Boxer was vaguely troubled. He set his ears back, shook his forelock several times, and tried hard to marshal his thoughts. But in the end, he could not think of anything to say. Some of the pigs themselves, however, were more articulate. 4 young porkers in the front row uttered shrill squeals of disapproval. All 4 of them sprang to their feet and began speaking at once. But suddenly, the dogs sitting around Napoleon let out deep, menacing growls. The pigs fell silent and sat down again. Then the sheep broke out into a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for nearly a quarter of an hour and put end to any chance of discussion. Afterwards, Squealer was sent round the farm to explain the new arrangement to the others. "Comrades," he said, "I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is pleasure. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your decisions for yourself. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades. And then where should we be? Suppose you have decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball, as we now know, is no better than a criminal. He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed," said somebody. "Bravery is not enough," said Squealer. "Loyalty and obedience are more important, and as to the Battle of the Cowshed, I believe the time will come when we shall find that Snowball's part in it is much exaggerated. Discipline, comrades, iron discipline is the watchword for today. One false step, and our enemies would be back upon us. Surely, comrades, you do not want Jones back." Once this argument was unanswerable. Certainly, the animals did not want Jones back. If the holding of debates on Sunday mornings was liable to bring him back, then the debates must stop. Boxer, who had now had time to think things over, voiced the general feeling by saying, "If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right." And from then on, he adopted the maxim, "Napoleon is always right," in addition to his private motto, "I will work harder." By this time, the weather had broken, and the spring plowing had begun. The shed where Snowball had drawn his plans to windmill had been shut up, and it assumed that the plans had been rubbed off on the floor. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, the animals assembled in the big barn to receive their orders for the week. The skull of Old Major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchard and set up on a stump at the foot of the flagstaff beside the gun. After hoisting the flag, the animals were required to file past the skull in a reverent manner before entering the barn. Nowadays, they did not sit all together as they had done in the past. Napoleon, with Squealer and another pig named Minimus, who had a remarkable gift for composing songs and poems, sat on the front of the raised platform, with the 9 young dogs forming a semicircle around them, and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing them in the main body of the barn. Napoleon read out orders of the week in a gruff, soldierly style, and after a single singing of the beasts of England, all of the animals dispersed. On the third Sunday after Snowball's expulsion, the animals were somewhat surprised to hear Napoleon announce that the windmill was to be built after all. He did not give any reason for having changed his mind, but merely warned that the animals that this extra task would mean very hard work. Might even be necessary to reduce their rations. The plans, however, had been all prepared to the last detail. A special committee of pigs had been at work upon them for the past 3 weeks. The building of the windmill, with various other improvements, was expected to take 2 years. The evening Squealer explained privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never in reality been opposed to the windmill. On the contrary, it was he who had advocated in the beginning. The plan which Snowball had drawn upon the floor of the incubator shed had actually been stolen from among Napoleon's papers. The windmill was, in fact, Napoleon's own creation. Why, then, asked somebody, had he spoken so strongly against it? Here Squealer looked very sly. That, he said, was Comrade Napoleon's cunning. He seemed to oppose the windmill simply as a maneuver to get rid of Snowball, who was a dangerous character and a bad influence. Now that Snowball was out of the way, the plan could go forward without interference. This, said Squealer, was something called tactics. He repeated a number of times, tactics. Comrades, tactics, skipping round and whisking his tail with a merry laugh. The animals were not certain what the word meant, but Squealer spoke it so persuasively that 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly that they accepted his explanation without further questions. Chapter 6. All the year, the animals worked as slaves, but they were happy for their work. They grudged no effort, no sacrifice, well aware that everything they did was for the benefit of themselves, those of their kind who would come after them, not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked 60-hour week. In August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoon as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous year. 2 fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee the coming of winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was good quarry limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so all the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except the use of picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to anybody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used, as they were, lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed rope round these,
And then, all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal they could lay hold of a rope. Even the pigs sometimes joined in at critical moments. They dragged at desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they toppled over the edge and shattered to pieces below. Transporting the stone, when it was once broken, was comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in carloads, the sheep dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had been accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. But it was slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry, and sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength was without equal to all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip, the animals cried out in despair, finding themselves dragged down the hill. It was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to stop. To see him toiling up the slope, inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hoofs clawing the ground, his great sides matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful, not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, "I will work harder," "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the mornings instead of a half hour. In his spare moments, which were not many nowadays, he would go on the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the site of the windmill unassisted. The animals were not badly off throughout the summer, in spite of the hardness of the work. If they had no more food than they had in John's days, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves, not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well, was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animals' method of doing things was much more efficient, saved labor. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animals now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off the pasture and arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of the hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was a need of paraffin oil, nails, strings, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also need for seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools. Finally, the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be procured, no one was able to imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon a new policy. From now onwards, Animal Farm would engage in trade with neighboring farms. Not, of course, for any commercial purpose, but simply in order to obtain certain materials which were urgently necessary. The needs of the windmill must override everything else, he said. He was therefore making arrangements to sell a stack of hay as part of the current year's wheat crops, and later on, if money were needed, it would be made up by the sale of eggs, for which there was always a market in Wellington. The hens, said Napoleon, should welcome this sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. Once again, the animals were conscious of a vague uneasiness. Never have any dealings with human beings, never engage in trade, never make use of money, had not been among the earliest resolutions passed the first triumphant meeting after Jones was expelled. All of the animals remembered passing such resolutions, or at least they thought they remembered it. The 4 young pigs who protested Napoleon abolished meetings raised their voices timidly, but were promptly silenced by tremendous growling dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his shudder for silence and announced that he had already made all the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come into contact with human beings, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to take a whole burden upon his shoulders. Mr. Whymper, solicitor, living in Willington, had agreed to act as intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every Monday morning to receive his instructions. Napoleon ended his speech with his usual cry of, "Long live Animal Farm," and after singing Peace of England, the animals were dismissed. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm and set the animals' minds to rest. He assured them that the resolution against engaging in trade and using money had never been passed or even suggested. It was pure imagination, probably traceable in the beginning to lies circulated by Snowball. A few animals still felt doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain about this is not something you haven't dreamed, comrades? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true, nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that they were mistaken. Every Monday, Mr. Whymper visited the farm as had been arranged. He was a sly-looking little man with side whiskers, a solicitor in a very small way of business, but sharp enough to have realized earlier that anyone else in Animal Farm would need a broker, and that commissions would be worth having. The animals watched his coming and going with a kind of dread, avoiding him as much as possible. Nevertheless, the sight of Napoleon on all fours delivering orders to Whymper, who stood on two legs, roused their pride and partly reconciled them to the new arrangement. Their relations with the human race were now not quite the same as they had been before. The human beings did not hate Animal Farm any less now that it was prospering. Indeed, they hated it more than ever. Every human being held an article of faith that the farm would go bankrupt sooner or later. Above all, the windmill would be a failure. They would meet in the public houses and prove one another by means of diagrams that the windmill was bound to fall down, or that if it did stand up, that it would never work. And yet, against their will, they had developed a certain respect for the efficiency which the animals were managing their own affairs. One symptom was that they had begun to call Animal Farm by its proper name, ceased to pretend it was called Manor Farm. They had also dropped their championship of Jones, who had given up hope of getting his farm back and gone to live in another part of the county. Except through Whymper, there was yet no contact between Animal Farm and the outside world. There were constant rumors that Napoleon was about to enter into a definite business arrangement with either Mr. Pilkington or Foxwood or Mr. Frederick of Pinchfield, but never, it was noticed, with both simultaneously. It was about this time the pigs suddenly moved into the farmhouse and took up their residence there. Again, the animals seemed to remember a resolution against this had been passed in the early days, and again Squealer was able to convince them that this was not the case. It was absolutely necessary, he said, that the pigs, who were the brains of the farm, should have a quiet place to work in. It was more suited to the dignity of the leader, for of late he had been taking this speaking to Napoleon under the title of leader, to live in a house than in a mere sty. Nevertheless, some of the animals were disturbed when they heard that the pigs not only took their meals in the kitchen and used the drawing room as a recreation room, but also slept in beds. Boxer passed off with the usual, "Napoleon is always right," but Clover